Hello, world! Welcome to Notes from the Aleph, a high point where all things are visible. Griffin is on assignment this week, so I am your hostess with the mostest. I'm Norman Rafferty. I work for Sanguine Games, where I also stream some other stuff when I get a chance. And today I'm hosting our roundtable discussion. I'm joined today by Lessons.
Hi, everybody. I am a streamer and a YouTuber under the name Lessons Learn 1 here on Twitch and Lessons Learn over YouTube. I'm also a writer over at Amazon on Night and Stars, my short story, fantastical and sci-fi short stories. And of course, I GM here every Sunday at 6 o'clock, Shadowrun 5th edition Mirrored Souls.
Excellent. And who could forget RedRabbit?
Hello all, I'm RedRabbit. This is my ASMR intro. I run our Ironclaw game here. I'll stop. There's a review or there's an advertisement on a podcast I listen to where someone is doing like an ASMR thing for a travel agency, and it's
I thought you were doing the Cadbury Bunny.
Oh, interesting.
After Easter. Who wants chocolate?
No, I do. Yes, please.
All right, the new theme chocolate, but go on.
Exactly. Toss this shit out. Yep. But yeah, I'm running our Ironclaw game on Wednesday, so come see that. And I'm playing in Forbidden Lands, which is a really cool system, so come see that on Sunday mornings also. And that's me.
Yep. Here we hate fun.
Yeah, we hate it.
But most importantly, what we hate this week is today's topic was one of our phrases, you don't know that. You weren't here to hear that, you weren't there. So the idea of something, a lot of people misinterpret what irony is, but dramatic irony is supposed to be something where the people who are watching the story know something that the characters themselves don't know. Like, we don't know they're walking into a trap, or what's the worst that could happen, or they don't know there's a serial killer out there to kill everybody, or they don't know where the pit traps are and we know about them. But also there can be the kind of thing in a tabletop game where you've split up the party, and some people are privy to certain events that others don't. And of course, I'm sure we're going to talk about our favorite, failing that intelligence ability check, so we don't actually tell you vital information that you should know. So today we're talking about information, secrecy, and how that applies to your tabletop gaming. So who wants to go first?
I just assume that my players know everything because it's simpler that way. And because when you try to tell them that they don't know things, they go like, well, wait a minute, what if we had like 3 days of travel and we were talking to each other and we had research and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just like, fine, you just know it. Go away. Case closed. Problem solved. Lessons, how do you handle it?
Always been a sticking point for me. I think it's a moment for moment thing, right? At least I think to ask, okay, how do you know this? Don't tell me that you know it. If there's a question, explain to me, how do you know this? Because often what happens is like, well, I mean, I guess I read it in a book somewhere. No, I don't know this. You know.
And you'll call them out. Be like, oh yeah, your players.
Yeah. They come up with a good explanation. It's like, yes, I know this because there's this ability in my character, or I remember, 3 sessions ago when I spent the time in the library. I was like, oh, that actually makes perfect sense. And now that everybody's caught up in the last 3 sections of when you went to the library, we can move on.
Yep. And then there's like annoying Rafferty, who I boast that I got a wizard in 3rd edition all the way up to 20th level without ever putting any marks in spellcraft whatsoever, because it was a useless skill, because I don't care what spell they're casting, and even if I did, I already know what it is and how it's going to kill me instantly. Like, I'm often persona non grata at the games because when I'm playing D&D, I say, so it's a weird-ass monster that can kill me instantly, right? And they go, well, no. You mean it can't kill me instantly? Good news. I'm often, I got the gray hairs to prove this. I've tried to play old-school revival games with folks, and some of the tricks that we used to do back in the 80s, show you guys how a 13-year-old defeats a dungeon, still work today. And it's kind of like trying to, fool somebody with these old tricks. But no, I mean, the Tomb of Horrors dates back to the 80s. And so, like, I'll often get GMs who like will accuse me of like, how do you know this is some weird ass thing that could instantly kill you and is beyond mortal comprehension? And I'm always going with I start with that I don't know what this is and it could kill me instantly, and then work from there. And we just did our discussion on weird funhouse dungeons, and it's like you can pretty much expect that everything in the D&D dungeon is going to kill you. Then when it doesn't, you're pleasantly surprised.
Right.
But I think more this was sort of the discussion of this is one reason why I'm usually not a big fan of lore. Like, for example, I always want to bring up like Vampire the Masquerade, because that is like lore. Like, we all agree, holy shit, that game has lore, right?
Oh, yes.
Right. So it's also got a lot of lore that most, a large portion of it would be stuff that you might not know as a character. Like deep dives into the secrets of, I don't even know which clans they have. Do they still have the Malkavian clan?
Yes.
Okay, but they don't have Tremere.
No, they have them too. They don't have Secrecy, apparently.
I thought they edited out Tremere because there was some rights dispute. Okay.
No, they still got them.
All right. Well, so there might be stuff that's deep in those clans' lore and also like the particular politics of what's going on that your character might not know about. But if you've been reading the books and learning the lore, you can't help but know all of this kind of secret stuff and secret dealings that are going on. So when that's invoked in the setting, you can call upon it.
Right.
And I've been in situations where I'll be told, well, you don't know this, in which case you've got a paradox going on, because on the one hand, obviously anyone who's read the lore would be by definition someone who is motivated enough to care. Like, they came to your gaming table, they want Vampire, and they went outside of the gaming context to learn more about the setting. So telling them, okay, even though you know more about the setting because you learned more about the franchise, I can't allow you to act on this in the game because your character wouldn't know it. I mean, you're effectively punishing someone for being interested in the game, right?
Well, I think that then becomes an issue, a more complicated issue, because like you said, we're talking about dramatic irony and we're talking about role-playing also. Like, obviously there are times when you want to use your knowledge of the setting and the world to your advantage as a character. And I think that there are definitely times when that makes sense, right? Like, I have been in that situation where I will say, I don't know, do you know that, right? Like, would your character know that given this circumstance? But oftentimes, yeah, it's fine. It's fine for their character to know that. It doesn't disrupt the plans of the game or the flow of the game. It doesn't cheapen anything. And if anything, it's a good opportunity to reward someone who is invested in the game and the setting. I agree. But there are some times when that knowledge and information just isn't appropriate for characters to have. You as a player might know that the god of trickery is masquerading as the god of justice, and that secretly, all of the clerics who are following him are being turned into a cult that are secretly, and like, you might know that, but your character wouldn't, right? And maybe being armed with that knowledge would actively harm the game in some way. Maybe not that. Maybe that's harsh, but I think what I'm trying to get at is that there's a point at which role-playing is about embodying a character or pretending to be someone you are not, armed with the knowledge that you may not have. And it's fun to do that. I don't think it's a big ask to ask people to be like, hey, pretend like you're this other person. That's a large part of what people came to the table for.
Well, I think it's a huge problem of the paradox of gaming, because on the one hand, like Vampire or even Dungeons and Dragons will ask you, hey, there's all these Forgotten Realms and book series you can read to learn the deep lore, period, next sentence. By the way, don't use these to ruin your game. And so you'll have the problem where they'll tell you this is part of the lore and the deep lore, but when you play your game, you're supposed to be free to do whatever you want. I mean, you go into the opposite problem here, where someone's a huge genre fiend and knows these characters and things that you're bringing up and saying they wouldn't do that. That's not what they did in the books. That's anti-character. And that, speaking of our last stream that we just did, like that's the paradox. Like on the one hand, a funhouse dungeon is supposed to be a simple little romp of we put a bunch of rooms here and you engage what's in them in the moment, which is like the opposite problem of if you're trying to invoke lore. Like, the Dragonlance of the war against the dragons and the evil dragons stealing eggs and turning them into stuff. Dragonlance coming back, kids.
I just started reading those books, actually.
Oh my God. Yep.
Yeah.
I almost want to do a roundtable where we discuss book 1 because, man, you want some dated 80s. But the moving forward, though, I mean, like I had a huge problem with Star Wars gaming because it's worse when the lore is contradictory. There's a Marvel superhero role-playing game that's coming out right now, and Marvel superhero is like 50 years plus of different authors working under different deadlines, coming up with different crap that then gets retconned in Secret Wars and other global events of time travel and that kind of stuff, that anything that might be canon might not be canon. And so you're going to run into the problem of it's the dual paradox of you're supposed to play Marvel because you know what Marvel is. Iron Man and Captain America. Do you want to do that? Here it is. And on the other hand, by the way, you're not supposed to know this. And so you'll have that paradox. And my usual solution to that is I don't like to play games that have heavy lore. Like I think that if you're going to praise Dungeons and Dragons for being simple and having dungeons, you can't also have giant bricks of lore filled with stuff that either doesn't affect you or you're not supposed to know. And you can't have both of those.
Yeah, I think, and this is also happens to any writer writing anything in a heavy lore setting like Marvel, like Star Wars, Star Trek, and all that. And I have a phrase for that, which is canon should be a tool, not a straitjacket. Because one of the things that can happen when a player is invested in lore is like, well, this happened here, this happened here. And the GM is going like, I know that, or maybe I didn't know that, but I have these plans and now I have to follow the rules that you set up because, it's canon and I have to follow. But even though it would not be fun or interesting to the things that I'm going to do.
But you even phrased the paradox as you said it. You said, but now I have to follow these rules. This is a role-playing game with a rule book. So telling people, here is a book of rules that we're going to follow. By the way, we're going to throw all this stuff out. You're sending a mixed message that rules are something that will enhance our experience, but you're also saying rules are something that will degrade our experience. And saying both of those at the same time is going to confuse your players.
Because all that lore is rules. I said this many times before, right? It's just I call the Candyland example that barring a change by the players, if I say at some point in my game that there's a land called Candyland ruled by the Lollipop King, that might be ridiculous. You might not like it, but it's there unless it gets changed. Now the question is, can it be changed? Should it be changed? Is it unfair to even consider changing?
Well, this is where I want to forward something and say that there's a lot of talk about old school revival, because a lot of people talk about how these games were fun, because dying instantly in the first room is hilarious. But one thing people forget about with old school revival is that was back when there weren't, like Dragonlance was brought into existence because TSR was publishing D&D, were getting sued by the Tolkien estate saying, you can't put hobbits and orcs in this. We made those up. That's our copyrighted. And TSR saying, it's just generic fantasy. People just taking it from their imaginations. But apparently, suddenly someone realized, instead of just pretending that people have imaginations, why don't we just write a whole bunch of book series? Why don't you guys write down your campaigns? And then Ed Greenwood and Weiss and Hickman went and wrote down their personal campaigns.
Because that was a big change. The expectation was that you were going to take the rules and make your own worlds, right? And they were going to be this sort of massive shared Dungeons and Dragons. All was a Dungeons and Dragons, but everybody would have their own take. And then we start having published, box sets. Even before that, with hard copies of Greyhawk rules and all that. And you started laying down this lore. And for a lot that we're talking in the last podcast, it makes it easier at times, right? Because I don't have to come up with the king of this land. There's this land. There's this king. This is a city. This is the population. You just look it up, and it's like, 125,000 people in this massive medieval city. go, right?
Right. Well, there's also lines to it. Like for example, there's two games that use the Forge in the Dark engine: Blades in the Dark and Wicked Ones. And my personal experience was Blades in the Dark has a lot of lore attached to their stock city of Duskfall, and a lot of the lore didn't make a lot of sense if you tried to push at it or manipulate it. Whereas Wicked Ones, there was a session 0 where you sit down and decide what your evil world is full of. Like, we haven't decided what it is. You're going to wreck this world because you're horrible, horrible people. So let's all sit down and decide what the world is like. And Wicked Ones felt a lot more empowering because, well, first of all, you're supposed to destroy everything. Wicked. But also, we didn't know what that was. But I think, unless some people have more specific information, we might want to talk a little bit more about Secrecy instead. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I want to say that I don't like lore, so as long as I've got an opportunity to say that.
Anti-lore, anti-fun.
No, I actually like lore, but I mean, I treat it with with tenterhooks. That's what.
Well, we're in a
right. I understand why it's important.
I mean, you can yell at me about how terrible Ironclaw is.
Well, the thing is, okay, so this might be my opportunity. Okay, then. Okay, hold on a second. I have one negative thing to say about Ironclaw. I like it very much, but I feel like one of the learning curves for Ironclaw coming from something like D&D, or something like Dungeon World, I think, and we can argue that these settings do very much define the world that they're in through their mechanics, as I think games should also. And you could argue that they have way more lore than they should have, at least in the D&D's case, which I think it does. But ultimately, it feels like, I think these two games feel kind of more like tool sets to me, in that their mechanics don't feel so coupled to their lore or their setting, at least when compared to something like an Ironclaw, where it is very clear that everything mechanical has a narrative basis and a lore basis, right? Like, a white mage isn't just a guy who casts healing magic. He is someone who belongs to a sect of this very specific type of religion, which means a lot of very important things for how they act and how people respond to them within the world based on where they are in that world, which is cool. Well, that's the kind of game that it is. But
it's one of my oppositions. When you talk about Dungeons & Dragons as a tool set, like, one of the oppositions that I have with a lot of gaming is that if this is supposed to be storytelling, then your game has to be a storytelling type game. And Dungeons & Dragons is anti-storytelling.
I agree.
You can't threaten people by killing them because they can be raised from the dead. There are spells such as Augury, Divination, and Legend Lore and Commune that will just tell you what you want to know.
Yeah.
And those are in the book. And it's funny that you, like Ironclaw is saying, well, it's all tied to this one setting. Dungeons & Dragons has that glaring version of D&D 4, because D&D 4 removed all of this stuff that I'm complaining about, and D&D 5 put it back. So D&D 5 is very much an anti-information gathering game.
Yeah.
Because you have the funhouse tours that I've talked about, but also once you start using those spells to answer all of your questions, then the GM starts putting in the amulets of non-detection and mind blanks and all this stuff that makes them useless. So now you have this dual thing of where we have lore that these spells exist. They're right there, and when you level up, you can take them. God forbid you play an Oracle in Pathfinder. That you have all this stuff right there that you can do it. But then we also added more stuff in the lore material that made it useless.
Yeah.
And so now you've got this dual situation of we're learning about the game. But
hold on. Wait, because I don't want to walk away from this just yet. I got one more thing to add there, because again, I think maybe it's sloppy design, but I will say for D&D, one thing I will say, this is like opposite day, because here I am supporting design choices.
You can't just be angry all the time. Say something good.
Right. So here's what I will say for D&D. It is a mess. It's a huge jumbled mess where, like, literally nothing was left off the table. Everything was thrown in, even to the point where it's self-contradictory. We've talked about that before too. But, like, I can say, okay, I'm going to create my own homebrew custom setting. I've just decided, and I'm going to cut out dwarves. Dwarves don't exist in this setting. But changelings from this source book do. You can't identify magic, and because it's a desert create food and water, we're just removing that spell. And everything else stays, and you have something that feels it's functional. Maybe it's not beautifully designed, but it is functional using the pieces that were already in the box, right? Where if you tried to do the same thing with like an Iron Claw and you wanted to start to change any small rules or details of that world, suddenly you're making huge ramifications to the lore that if you follow them down begin to spiral out in ways that are like, oh, okay, well,
Well,
right.
it sounds to me like that's a different discussion because
Okay.
I could counter that. I think a larger thing was the original topic was brought up was how you handle people not knowing certain things at the table. I think especially because they want to talk about table talk, like the idea that like one thing that makes me incredibly mad. Let's put a pin in that. One thing that makes a lot of people mad about games, they always say never split the party, and that's usually because they're used to D&D where everything is level matched. So if you split the party, then half of you get killed.
That's where that came from, yeah.
Right. But also there's the headache that winds up with a game master, because if you ran off and learned something separate from everyone else, okay, either I would have to take this person out of the room and deny everyone else the information of what was going on while they weren't there, or we would have to do that aside when they were present at the table and just assume everyone else is mature enough to not act on that information until they're informed of it.
Yeah, well, again, I'm the person who the first thing I do when the player joins back is like, did you tell them about this?
Oh, I'm brute force. I say they tell you everything because I'm not even interested in entertaining that discussion.
No, but I asked the question because if they choose not to, then that becomes the rule. Like, yes, you heard it because you were at a table, but this player right here said, no, I did not tell them, or I told them my version of events. It's like the whole translation thing where the GM is saying something, but of course it's not speaking in tongue, so we're all assuming that everybody's translating. He's like, you're not going to go for what I said, you go for what the other player has said.
All right, and when you're invoking that though, like based on our Funhouse discussion, one thing we didn't mention during the Funhouse discussion was the idea that you are all a party of like-minded individuals working towards a common goal, going on a tour to see a bunch of stuff. Okay, related to this, there's a tacit assumption in gaming that you all formed a party. This is the loader mulch thing we did a long time ago. You all got together to form an alliance because you were all like-minded individuals who trust one another in situations of dire peril.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, we assume that all of you would be getting along and informing each other. So this brings up a philosophical question. Why wouldn't you tell everyone everything you saw when you were away from them? Why would you not do that?
Character friction.
But why?
Because it can be good and interesting, right? Just because the parties have a common purpose doesn't mean that they have a matching worldview.
But it doesn't mean they don't.
It could be both.
Right. I mean, like I agree with you there. Where some people will say, well, this could be interesting as a character fissure, but the whole loadermost discussion I had was if you didn't trust somebody you were with, you would get rid of them or you would leave. So, like there's this thing where I've seen what you're talking about with the characters acting as crossbow, but I want to point out that if you're in that kind of game, which would be closer to a vampire game or possibly a Shadowrun game, where people would have different agendas, you're not in the D&D game, where it's a bunch of us going on a guided tour against things, don't think too hard, kill the monsters. You're in a different setting. And did you tell everybody you were in a different setting?
I don't know if that makes for a huge jump because it depends on what you say, right? Again, player agency.
Well, why would you keep if you were keeping information from everyone that didn't matter, then it wouldn't matter.
I mean, I think that you're putting in a binary something that I would say to be in graded levels, right? Some things that are absolutely necessary for our survival, and it do not make sense for not to share that information. And other things might be personal concepts or ideas or views, or maybe you want to prevent the larger disaster. Maybe you don't want the paladin to go off and kill all the goblins because that you expect them to do that.
But then you're ruining the funhouse. If your withholding of information from the rest of your party could change the progress of the adventure, you are changing the progress of the adventure.
Then change the progress of the adventure.
Which means you're not on a funhouse tour anymore, which would mean your GM might get confused and upset. And
Right.
And then that might disrupt. Which once again, if you were on a funhouse event, if we were using that as the model, you might. In other words, like that's what I'm getting at here is like, what's the point of? In order for withholding information from the party to have any effect, it has to have an effect, which means you must be running a game that has radiant storytelling. Otherwise, it doesn't matter what you're doing.
Well, I think that's the problem with the idea of you have to be running a funhouse dungeon and modern D&D encouraging
right. Which means it could only matter if you were running right. So in other words, then we have to discuss like what kind of game, because there are some games like I guess Powered by the Apocalypse, because the way a lot of the Powered by the Apocalypse games are written, you track your relationship number with other people. Like Dungeon World's fascinating with this, because Red, you played Dungeon World, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you notice it makes you track your relationship with other players? Even though, why would this ever go down? Like, why would you not be working with the other players to kill monsters and take treasure?
I mean, I don't know. From what I remember, you track relationships, but they're not necessarily all positive relationships. And I think that is a way for you to gain experience.
It is, because they're copying it from Apocalypse World. Apocalypse World, the only way to gain experience. And I've already complained in the past that two Apocalypse World characters could just say in certain combinations, just say we like each other and instantly max out their levels. Because they're supposed to be, in theory, it's fascinating because they're supposed to be in some theory that you're keeping secrets from each other or manipulating each other or being mean to each other, which I guess some people out there do. Because people tell me they do it.
I mean, I think if you're a roleplay heavy group, I mean, let's allow for the possibility that Rafferty, and I can't speak for Lessons because we haven't actually gamed together, but I know a lot of other people on this channel that I have played with are a particular type of gamer. I wouldn't want to say power gamer and have you guys think that I was being judgmental or anything, but
say power gamer. I don't think that's an insult.
Yeah. Good. So you approach the game from this very mechanical, optimal play style, and again, nothing wrong with that. But that there are a lot of people that approach it from the role players in the world who want nothing more than to have a little stage to play out like an improvised character drama on. And for those people, I think being able to decide complex relationships between their characters would be the point of the whole game. Well, I think they could get experience. It would be good. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, with a game like Apocalypse World, they're very aggressive. See that, with a game like Apocalypse World, tracking your relationships, I could see that because it's a survival game. With Dungeon World, it completely confuses me because it's like, while I could see you might be having a little drama, Dungeon World seems very simplistic. Like it's simpler than D&D. Why?
The stated goal was to pare down D&D into its basics. And so survival of the group seems to be paramount. So I can see why, the problem of not sharing information would get everybody killed.
Except you don't actually have politics in your group. You're all aggressively, you're a party of like-minded individuals. If you didn't trust someone, you would leave. So it's weird. It seems like an extra factor of something that you're tracking because it was an Apocalypse World. Like an Apocalypse World, actually getting a negative reputation with someone can give you the ability to manipulate them even better. Whereas in Dungeon World, there's no actual manipulation skills in the game. Charisma only applies to henchmen.
I think there's maybe another perspective, and maybe this is me reading into it, but somewhere maybe in the intro for Dungeon World, they talk about how this is sort of this is how they wanted to play D&D, and they kind of forked off of 4E. A lot of people left the game around then for various reasons, but to me it always read like they were Well, like in proper Dungeons and Dragons, there's no provisions made for inter-party conflict. It's assumed that everyone is on the same page. Whereas
the game where you can have
right.
people good and evil at the same
Yeah,
table.
of conflicting alignments, right? You would think, but there's nothing in the rules for resolving conflicts that could arise from that type of party dynamic, which is interesting. To me, Dungeon World always felt like, oh, we're here. We want to be able to have games where, the wizard or the elf and the dwarf might not see eye to eye and might have conflicts, and where role-playing that out actually led to character progression.
Right,
Like, this is what we were playing before, but we want it mechanized.
And getting back to secrecy and that kind of stuff, like I'm not a fan of saying that. I'm not saying you're saying this, but this is tangential to this, which is the idea that role-playing means keeping secrets from other people. That's what role-playing is. Because I see this in Dungeons and Dragons. When you're in a game like Dungeons and Dragons or Dungeon World, the only formal way you're expressing yourself in the game is killing monsters and not dying. It's not that you can't socialize, but if you knew anything other people didn't, like if you found treasure and didn't want to tell anybody else, or you pick someone's pocket and steal something from them, two harrowed traditions of D&D. Like keeping that a secret is role playing. I somehow invoked dramatic irony and didn't tell somebody something.
Right.
To me, I'm not saying people can't do that, but that is definitely at odds with if you would say in your next breath, by the way, we're doing these simplistic dungeons because they're easier and more fun. I mean, like if you're going to do a game where we're backstabbing and being secret to one another, like I wouldn't want to play a game where it was simplistic dungeons and the only way we can express ourselves is is secrets and lies, because then you've got that big trouble brewing.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that is definitely something that I've seen a lot. It's something that I feel like maybe I've always been deficient at with being a game master, which is I'm not the guy who's like passing notes around the table and giving people like private information and stuff. And
which is weird because you're doing vampire.
Yeah, right. But I just don't. I like to run a very open table. It's a lot of like extra mental steps for me, and I feel like players love it. Like I feel like players love that stuff. They love the idea that like they have a secret that they have to keep from the table. And I always felt it feels very gimmicky. Like it's very much a lot of extra work to go for something that doesn't actually add that much to the group experience. But I've also never been on the receiving end of it. Maybe if I was playing in a game and someone said like, hey, you're secretly working for the Lich King, or hey, when you touch this item, it cursed you and now you want to steal from your friends or something. Maybe I'd be like, wow, this is a whole new dimension of the game. But honestly, there's like an implied antagonism there where like suddenly now you're pitting your players against each other at cross purposes, which is something I spend a lot of time as a GM trying to avoid generally for the sake of like everyone's fun and the continuation of the game. So
yeah, that was what I brought up with Loader Mulch, was the idea that like what is a party, because you have a reason to all be together. If this was a movie or something, you'd have a lot of a narrative reason to force people to be together like a buddy comedy.
Now, I want to give a concrete example from my role-playing past. There was a D&D adventure we were playing, I think, 4th edition at the time, or 3rd edition, doesn't really matter. I adapted to it, and my character was a wizard, touch an item that did the whole essence transfer thing. So my character's essence went to the item, and whoever was trapped in the item went into my body, right? Possessed my body. Normally that would be like, oh no, I lost my character. But I was like, oh no, this is a cool idea, right? I want to play this other character and see what happens. Well, another player didn't like that, and this is a word we be avoiding because we haven't said it yet, but I'm going to say it. He meta the whole thing until he badgered me into revealing the fact that I wasn't who I was pretending to be. I didn't even get a chance to play this character because this other player just hated the idea that he could get betrayed and stabbed in the back, right?
Right.
So he did everything in his power to convince the GM and everyone else that I was this other person, because he knew, even though he wasn't in that room, if this happened in front of everybody, that I wasn't playing that character. And that kind of ruined the fun for me because I was like, I could use the situation and play it up, but now
right, and the problem is you've got two different things going on here. I don't think I ever see discussion in the tabletop writing itself, like how to run a party. It is the idea of the party, because like the idea that you are all together because you are like I said, like-minded individuals working towards a common goal. Instead, I'll often see notes that describe it as a different way, and that person is objecting to your character being a malefactor that's going to hurt everyone, because that's not what a gaming is, and so they're mad that that's going on and they don't want that. And so you can say, well, it would
there's
be more
nothing
fun.
they can do about it.
Well, you could always load them up. You can always quit. But that would make them mad because they've invested in the game. But like it's an interesting paradox here, because you have like a player. The player at the table doesn't want this kind of secrecy and bullshit backstabbing going on. Isn't their feeling valid?
Yeah.
I mean,
but it's also pitted against my chance to play this other character. I wasn't against the idea that at some point in the future I would get my old character back, or not, as the case may be.
Right.
It just was a turn of events that happened, right? And often, when this happens in this item, you say you lost your character because now you're
right. Now, see, I'm saying I agree with you. It's an interesting challenge, but if you have to weigh the pros and cons, I'm going to go back to the text of the game, and nowhere in the game does it say you're supposed to at what, are we supposed to trust each other, or are we a kind of backstabbing party? Because I've argued that the role-playing game Paranoia came out of Dungeons and Dragons. Because Dungeons and Dragons First Edition, Unearthed Arcana, introduced the idea of the all-evil party. Because they introduced dark elves and deep gnomes, and they were evil, but better. Like, dark elves just had spell resistance. They were elves with spell resistance. That's better in every way.
And magical armor and magical weapons.
Well, that was gear you could find, but if you wrote down I was an elf and then wrote dark on it, immediately you got magic resistance and had all elf powers. The only change was you were evil and everyone hated you, but you're an adventurer who goes around killing things for money. Everyone hates you anyway. You were going to be evil anyway. It's D&D. Who cares? And so you add party, and also there's a lot of backstabbing and stuff, because what we just talked about with secrecy. Like I said, I don't like defining it that way. Paranoia is the role-playing game that grew out of that, because they said, what if we just made a game where everybody did that?
Right, it's funny.
And it's fun in short doses. The huge problem Paranoia has is you can't play a campaign of it because it's too exhausting to do that all the time. It's fun once in a while, especially with strangers, but you don't want to level that character up to level 20.
It's definitely something that is seductive. Like, people love the idea of it, and it seems to be something that everyone comes to that conclusion on their own sooner or later, of like, ooh, well, there's no reason we couldn't have you be mind controlled, and then you have this like secret goal that no one else knows about, and could like stir up drama. The problem is that it's only then playing to one person, unless the table does know about it. And if they do know about it, then they instantly start going, oh, at every available opportunity, we're just going to like roll to see if we discover weird shit going on with this character. And it's like, I don't know.
And you try to focus away from the story to this one player is going to think of nothing until they reveal that. You ruin the game for them.
Right. Yeah. It's just very weird, because it seems like an idea that could and should work. And you know what? I bet it works really great in performative play again, because you've already got so many perceived notions of what's supposed to happen that, and maybe people see that stuff on like Critical Role and they think, ooh, this would be fun. And they're passing notes and stuff. But I don't know.
Yeah, but some people came to the table to be their awesome, little, like a fighter assassin or cool character. They didn't come for that because it would really bother them. And also, like in Critical Role, you can get away with it because, once again, performative, like that's where you need your session zero. The performative play is, I, as the game host, are going to present scenarios to you, and you're going to react to them in character, and you're reacting in character is the dramatic irony of things is primarily what's important. And I have to repeat that because that's what performative play is. You read the text of Dungeons and Dragons, it doesn't say that anywhere.
Right.
It says you'll build the character you want, and if you can get to level 20, we'll give you the ability to throw these spells. It doesn't say anywhere in there, by the way, do whatever your GM tells you to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. And
So
but also there are games that I think use it, and it could work, and the
There
game
are games.
structures around it. I mean, when you mentioned Paranoia, I'm thinking of
Paranoia.
Free League's Alien game, which I got to play in once, and was really cool. And
Which is deliberately built so you get betrayed at some point. Once again,
exactly,
not a campaign
yes. Not a campaign
Yeah,
game,
no.
but a game that does have rules and provisions for this kind of secretive, everyone has their own kind of secret objective and also their own like team objective, right? So it creates that tension. It's cool.
Yeah, I mean, when you started out with the events, a better example might be Vampire. Like one thing that continually frustrates me about Vampire is the complete lack of irony in Vampire.
Yeah.
And by this, I mean that whenever I'm playing the game, I'm a vampire. I hang out with other vampires. They hang, and maybe ghouls, who are people who know what vampires are. And then we go off and we meet mages and werewolves and mummies and undead and monsters. At almost no point are we hanging out with normal people. And to me, a lot of the appeal of Vampire would be the secrecy of being a vampire, of wandering around, and no one here at this party knows I'm really a vampire. Like, it would be cool about trying to use those powers in subtle ways that wouldn't gather too much attention and gather that. But that idea of secrecy is like aggressively absent in Vampire, because whenever I'm at the table, whenever I'm playing those published adventures, I'm never in a situation where being secretive about my vampirism is anything.
Yeah.
And so to me, I feel like that's the weird opposite problem. People will argue in favor of playing Dungeons and Dragons and keeping secrets from each other, a game about a party united against TPKs. But then we get to Vampire, and it's like, oh, no, don't do secrecy. Constant vampire, inside. Be with insiders all the time.
Yeah.
And that, that's a bizarre paradox that you see going on there. But I can justify by saying that, people come to games expecting a bunch of book to tell them how to play make-believe. They come to a game expecting it to be irony-free.
Yeah, I think most games do.
But if, and now let's go back to game design. If that is not the purpose of the game, why isn't the games telling us what happens when certain people have certain information and how to handle it? They're not doing that. Positive.
Short answer, because they suck.
Yeah. How can we fix that? Can we just literally have a paragraph like this? In this game, in Dungeons and Dragons, sometimes characters are going to learn information about this.
So I think the first step in the right direction is the relationship matrix that we're seeing in games like Vampire. It's in Urban Jungle, and it's in Blades in the Dark. That the idea that if I did something and they found out about it, this NPC faction would hate me, and that's something I don't want.
It's also something that doesn't end the game. It makes it, if anything, more interesting. So.
It doesn't end the game. It's like that's one of the reasons why I was rebelling against the Funhouse tour. The idea that there is a world state, and I care about the world state. Because if the problem is if just keeping secrets from fellow players, if the only way I can exert agency or get away with something is to annoy other players, I'll start to annoy other players. And we all agree we don't want to piss each other off. Someone's going to quit the game or someone's feelings are going to get hurt. Yeah. Whereas in a Funhouse, or linear game, if I can't change the world, that's why you want a world state. And the nice part about making it explicit, like actually having the freaking mood board with the numbers on it you can see, and gamifying it, cements the idea in players' heads that this stuff is actually changing.
Yeah.
That I can get behind. The relationships with other player characters strikes me as pretty gimmicky. I'm only going to be in a party of people I trust. If I don't like the people in the party I'm with, I'm too old for this. I'll quit the game. Whereas
then the game should say that. You are members of party, and even if it's just a byword. Yeah.
Right. That I already talked about the loader mulch paradox, where people don't say, I didn't trust other people in my party. They'll just say, I just didn't enjoy the game. But getting a little back to players love to get away with something. The last thing I want to talk about is secrecy is, speaking of meta, one of the biggest problems is that the GM knows everything. By definition, they know everything because nothing happens in the game unless the GM says it happens. This is kind of why I object to the idea that the GM is a player. Players can be ignorant of what's going on, but the GM knows everything. And that causes a huge problem that I used to run into in D&D, especially, where you can't fool anyone in a role-playing game because the GM knows you're lying. Like, if my character walks up to guards and say, "Hey, hello, how are you doing, fellow guard? Please let me in." Many GMs will not be able to jump over the hurdle that I know the player is lying. So it doesn't matter what they roll on their bluff check. I know the player is lying.
Yeah.
And so even if they get away with it, now if some people say, well, that's a bad GM, and I agree. I mean, but also, like, do the games spend any time talking about that? Like, or other things, like such example, like NPCs not knowing our own combat tactics. Like, you can't, can you surprise an enemy in the game by having the exact kind of spell to deal with them? I see lots of times where GMs talk about how they built a killer party specifically to kill players because I know what spells they have and I'm going to make a party that specifically destroys them. I don't hear a lot of stories on the other end about players who had something in reserve and a surprise spell that they sprang on NPCs that had no idea what they were about to face. I mean, I'm sure it happens. I don't hear that.
I have a group. There's a group chat which I didn't know existed until after I stopped running this game and started playing it, and they invited me to the chat. It's called New World Order, and it was a players only chat where they would talk strategy, where they basically talk about the finer points of their character builds and stuff for this D&D game that I ran for like 3 years, which is very funny and charming. And I mean, I found it very funny and charming. I don't know. Maybe other people might not find that, but yes, I think there is
formed a secret group so they could talk about strategies to defeat you.
Yes, well, to deal with stuff. I think it started as sort of like we want to talk about like how we intend to build our characters, but we don't want to talk about it in front of you because we don't want the possibility that you will start to include stuff to specifically counter that. I don't think I was doing that to begin with, but who can say? This was
I don't
5 years ago.
I don't think you were either, but many GMs would. Well, to get back to setting aside, like, for example, with mechanics, one of the things I love to do in Ironclaw is I've deliberately built an unassuming character. Like, I deliberately approach enemies, and I deliberately in the game with the role-playing character, ask them to surrender or ask them, please, you don't want to do this. And I've deliberately designed my character that if they do take advantage of me standing there with no weapons out, I can suddenly, out of nowhere, unleash hell. But enemies don't necessarily know that. But right. I can do that in Ironclaw because doing it in D&D would be a colossal waste of time. Because in D&D, everybody just attacks you all the time because they're fucking monsters. And it doesn't matter if I have a weapon out or not because there's no counterattacking or anything like that. So, like, when you talk about like rules endorsing behavior, I enjoy playing, once again, dramatic irony in there. They don't know that I'm able for doing that, but I built a character who could do that. And then in the game, I get to do that. And that makes me happy. I don't play a game like D&D because in D&D, secrecy, deception, stealth, colossal waste of your time. It doesn't do anything.
I mean,
I don't know.
I think there's room for it. I think it comes down to a lot of how people play and rules endorsing behavior, that kind of stuff as well.
I mean, I agree with you. It could come up, but we already discussed the idea of the player sneaks off, which bores the rest of the people. And then they discover something that they come back to the party and don't tell them. I mean, Lesson's already talked about, their toxic issue. I could talk about some of the ones that I've seen. I mean, I'm not saying you couldn't make it work in D&D. I'm talking about Again, it's like I'm sure someone does it, but in 99% of the games, they're written linear, scare, kill monsters, this kind of stuff. Don't split up the party. Don't bore everyone. You're all a unified front against evil. And keeping secrets from one another is, will be more detrimental to more groups than it would be helpful to other groups. The entire idea of sneaking off and eavesdropping on someone, we already talked about how this was impossible to even do in D&D. And then if it's a guided funhouse tour, does it even really matter? Like that kind of, like, secrecy doesn't matter in D&D. You kill, the last thing I always point out is every time you kill an NPC, every single time, they have a note on their body that explains their plot in entire detail, and it's written in the common language.
I avoid doing that a lot because
right. Well, you guys are good game masters. This is published material by Wizards of the Coast expressing intent on how they believe other people should run the game.
I think something I failed to talk about, and I think it would have gone very different, is that if there was an agreement on the table for all players, particularly between the players, that it was okay for other players to keep secrets, right? Yeah, I know that you know this because I know that ultimately you're not going to use that to hurt my enjoyment of the game, right? There's little that separation between character and player, where you can betray my character, but I'm not going to feel hurt about it because that's the thing.
I mean, I also have to counter that by saying the secret that has no bearing on play is not really a secret.
I mean, it has bearing on play.
I was going to say that
the characters, but there's also the idea that you're not gonna, and this is very difficult to pull off because there's always an ability, like feeling that you personally as a human being got betrayed as opposed to the character got betrayed.
But like, I would love to see. I mean, I haven't played Vampire 5th Edition, but I would love to see a vampire game where everyone has some sort of secret stash or secret reserve or secret operation that's going on that would be embarrassing if it were revealed, and they have an intent to reveal it, keep it revealed, a masquerade, if you were. But once again, like we all agree that would be a cool idea, but we're on 5th edition right now, and the designers never do that.
Yeah, so, I mean, the problem with all of this is that these secret things only are actually interesting and meaningful once they're no longer secrets, unless you have a group that can really appreciate dramatic irony, and we've established that's something that most players don't buy into or are not interested in. So
I mean, I've written stuff down about my character that I never told anybody about, but it was like, I'm just jerking around.
You're having fun.
If it never comes up, then who cares?
That's the thing. You wrote it down for the potential that one day it might matter and it might come up and it'd be fun in that moment. And that's, I think that's
just funny to me. Like, no one else thinks it's funny. So
sure, right? Like, that's, I think everybody's got headcanon, and there's plenty of things that you might like about a character that the rest of the table doesn't need to know about to enjoy your character and to enjoy the game. I think that's totally fine. But this issue of, core important information that's being withheld or belongs to one character or another, I don't think it adds as much to the game as it takes away, and the potential for it going very bad is there in most cases.
Building forward, we haven't mentioned story point games like Fate, and our upcoming Abyss, that where you could spend a story to invoke some sort of backstory secret that you've never revealed until now. The kind of flashback sequence of, hey guys, it turns out, I had a secret repository of cash or a secret weapon or secret connections all this time, and I'm only revealing it right now because it's important. That's not technically a secret. That's something we get right now.
That's Schrodinger's secret, but I think that has much more application in a game because, again, it exists to serve the immediate events of the story. A secret doesn't matter until it's revealed, so why even carry it? Why not have a story point instead? I think that's perfectly fine because it's something that was designed with a social game in mind versus something that's just sort of like, wouldn't it be cool if, unlike everyone else at the table, I had some information and no one else knew it and I could act upon it? Like,
I mean, some people will
that's
think
antisocial.
Yeah. Well, some people will think that's really cool, and sometimes I have humored players that want that. But we're all in agreement here that we're all in agreement that there'll be some players who are here for sincerity. They want everything to be, they're playing a role-playing game because they don't want any ambiguity. A short sword does 1d6. It says that right here. And I think that if you're going to err on the side of secrecy, of inter-party secrets versus not, the role-playing games, by their nature and presentation, are pro openness, pro sincerity, pro everyone knowing everything. And if you're going to twiddle with that, you're going to have to get buy-in from everyone, usually in advance. Because if you spring it on people, I think we're all in agreement here that the text of even intrigue games like Vampire are written with the idea that A is A and everyone is what they say they are.
Yeah. I'll say there are maybe some, I'm just trying to think of cases where I've used it and cases where I think it works. I think there is one case for okay, this player has been, ran into a mind flayer or an aboleth or something. They failed a roll, and I think it would be a cool story point for them to be subtly being manipulated, right? And the way that I would play it, I think, is I would approach that player away from the table and say, like, here's what I'm thinking could happen. First, get complete buy-in from that player and be like, are you comfortable with this idea that you've lost some agency in your character? And then the reveal would be to the whole party, that player included. It would be like, hey, none of you realized this, but 3 nights ago or something, this player or this character had snuck out and done something, and it has led to this challenging situation now. The guards have ambushed you or whatever it was, or the aboleth has followed you or something.
No, and I would honestly reverse that and say that there were 2 other ways I would handle that. I would do the story point thing. I would do the let the player work out normally, and then I would decide what they were doing in secret because they're secretly mind controlled. And have stuff showing up in their possession or that kind of stuff. And then, or maybe just once spend a plot token or whatever it is in the game and say, it turns out this person's been in disguise the entire time.
Right.
But that takes agency. You can, as much fun as it sounds, getting a player to do that. Once again, some players, their brains will break.
Exactly.
Say, I can't believe you lied to me this entire time. You've ruined this game for me.
It does take away agency in a kind of personal way. I think there's ways that DMs, a DM could say, the guards saw your smoke from your campfire and ambushed you. That's effectively the same thing as saying, your character was mind controlled and gave these guards this information. The important difference is that this player character is now implicated in that, which makes all the difference in the world, right? But I think what it comes down to is there's always this impulse to introduce mystery in these games. I think maybe that's what leads to a lot of this stuff in the first place, is this desire for there to be mystery and suspense, and it's almost too tempting to walk away from a narrative perspective.
Well,
what if the players were involved? What if you were the murderer the whole time?
Yeah, right. And while that sounds cool, because I agree with you, it is cool. But I always want to point out that one thing we were railing against in the Funhouse discussion is that that's actually anti-mystery. Everything, monsters sit in a box and wait for you to politely kill them. They always drop the note to tell you where to go. Evil is always evil. They're labeled evil, so there's no ambiguity there. So there are a lot of people who are playing the games, and pointedly a lot of people who are writing the games who are not interested in ambiguity.
Yep. I think that's
and we think they're lame, because we're all in agreement that the kind of I think we're all in agreement that a game where we're suspicious and where players can get away with stuff, I think, is fun. That's one major reason. I know I had a hand in designing Iron Claw, but I've also tried playing a Dungeons and Dragons game where I was playing a character. I try to play rogues and I try to be sneaky and deceptive, and I get burned out very quickly because but it doesn't work because either the GM is too meta to interpret it, or it's a funhouse ride and it doesn't matter. If I can't manipulate the story in any way, then all this disguise and secrecy and keeping notes from each other doesn't actually do anything.
Yeah.
So
it has to have an effect.
So I guess the short answer, maybe we can get Griffin back to the table. I think we can think of ways that can liven things up, and I have been in games to liven it up, but we all agree you got to get some buy-in first. So any last minute comments, because we're almost out of time?
Yep, I think its buy-in is absolutely necessary. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
Yeah, I second that, I suppose. It's definitely got to be... I also think that...
Emphatic buy-in, because the game is against it.
Well, that's the thing, right? I think the other aspect is that this kind of thing could work potentially in a system that was designed to do it. If there were mechanical provisions and people went in
Or in a
knowing.
setting. Like, I would expect that more in maybe Shadowrun and yes, Vampire than I would in Dungeons and Dragons.
Agreed. Although I still think that there are maybe games like that should still formalize it. Like, I do think Vampire could use rules for that.
Still do it. It's just that if a random person showed up to play D&D today, they're probably looking, they're probably not looking for injury. They're probably looking for stabbing things. Okay, so thanks everybody for coming to Notes from the Aleph. We're a little short this week, but no less as strong. And look for us as we stream on twitch.tv/Ractus, where we play your favorite games and some games that you should like more if you have better taste.
Yes.
You will subscribe. You will upvote us. And so thanks for watching us. We're here like every other week. And anything else, or just bye.
Bye.
Bye. Go home.